No longer did the knights do battle for earthly reward, but for the goal of spiritual truth. The Holy Grail is identified with the chalice drunk from by Christ at the Last Supper, which was then used to collect some of his blood at the crucifixion. Afterwards the chalice disappeared. In romantic fiction, it became an object of intense desire for those who are prepared to search for it. Some versions declare that it gives off light and perfume, that it can heal the wounded, and, among its more spiritual benefits, that it can produce a sense of well-being similar to that induced by Holy Communion. Sinners can never set eyes upon the Grail. Only Arthur's gallant knights can approach it, and they are bound by absolute secrecy. The Grail's mysteries are held to transcend life and death, and its awesome power brings dire misfortune upon anyone who betrays its secret. The tradition of the Grail presents a vivid expression of blood worship, and at some stage it evidently came into contact with that of the turret. Not only do they both represent archetypal quests for the seeker after hidden knowledge, the four fundamental symbols of Grail legend almost coincide with the four suits of the minor arcana. These are cups, buttons, swords, and coins in the case of the turret. Chalice, lance, sword, and platter according to the Grail quest. The Grail legend evolved from pagan conceptions of the miraculous cauldron of fertility, and the entire theme is enmeshed with primitive preoccupations with life and death, as revealed by the cyclical effects of the seasons. It is nature itself which provides the inspiration behind the idea of resurrection following upon death. Every year, vegetation sprouts, withers, dies, and then grows again. As spring moves through autumn and back to spring, man is utterly dependent on this cycle for his survival, and fertility rites came to be performed with crop spirits revered and appeased as necessary. As corn was the staple diet of settled peoples, so corn gods came to dominate communal religious practice. Arthurian romance similarly wove itself into a cycle of nature. The Round Table, for example, is emblematical of cyclical death and rebirth. Central to this feature of the legend is the introduction of the Fisher King. In some versions, the Grail is held in custody in a mysterious castle. The guardian monarch suffers a wound, a spear thrust through the thigh, which is a polite description for castration. The king is unable to govern, and his constituency is laid barren and the wasteland. The cycle of rebirth is broken. There is no more regeneration. His kingdom dies, so the king turns for solace to fishing, the Fisher King. His health and fertility of his kingdom, which lies about his castle, can only be restored once his wound has been healed through the sinless touch of a quester after the Grail. Until the king is healed, the Grail's powers are held in suspension. In more recent accounts, the title Fisher King can loosely be applied to any ruler whose virility is somehow linked to the fertility of the land. Any misfortune befalling him, illness, injury, impotence, reflects his own sterility onto his kingdom. Only his restoration will bring verdure back to the wasteland. Many of these ideas can be discerned in Dracula. To begin with, Stoker makes use of the agricultural calendar, reversing the traditional death and rebirth cycle, so that the novel opens in the spring and concludes in the autumn. The Count, like some malign vegetation, begins to flourish in May, and like the leaves on the trees, returns to dust and is blown away in November. The novel's cyclical structure even extends to its geography, opening in Transylvania, blooming in London, and returning to its sources for the conclusion. So conscious is Stoker that the book's beginning and end should exactly coincide that, at the climax, he makes Van Helsing and Mina retrace the precise route traversed by Jonathan Harker 6 months previously. Further indication of Stoker's thinking is gleaned from the name of the ship which carries Dracula to England, the Demeter. This is what Walsh infers from Stoker's choice of vessel. Demeter was an earth goddess, to be precise, a corn goddess, and the mother of Persephone. When Persephone was stolen by Hades, Demeter wandered over the earth in search for her. But when Persephone was found, Demeter had to strike a bargain with Hades that Persephone stay with him for 6 months of the year. Thus, one is the mythological rendering in the story of Demeter of the origins of the seasons, connected with the king of the underworld, Hades. Demeter and Persephone, before the Hades incident, lived in a pastoral garden, and spoiled by winter and want. Hades' interference changed the world from a pastoral summer paradise to its present seasonal alteration. The meaning of Dracula's passage by the Demeter underscores the dire threat of Dracula's intention to destroy the pastoral vitality, fertility, and beauty of the West. Dracula flouts nature through his every essence. As an undead, he both transcends and subverts the order of natural law, the returning to dust of all mankind according to God's plan. Dracula exists apart from the chain of being. He is a kind of anti-creation, opposing the natural life-to-death cycle of human existence. These cyclical dimensions to Dracula can be explored more deeply by returning to the imagery of Arthurian Grail romance and consideration of what Henley terms the Gnostic quest and the Victorian wasteland. Gnosticism is a generic term for a variety of spiritual beliefs and practices having as their common focus a mystical quest for hidden knowledge of God and the universe. Knowledge which cannot be realized through the confines of dogmatic thought. The Grail legends are similarly about the search for psychic growth and spiritual emancipation, and as shown with the tarot, Dracula takes the form of a mighty quest. To illustrate this interpretation, it will be helpful to reflect upon the moral decay of late 19th century England as portrayed in Dracula, and Stoker's apparent desire to rehabilitate this Victorian wasteland. Although Transylvania is anemic in one sense, a barren land drained by the blood-sucking of Dracula, London in the 1890s is anemic in another. It presents a thin disciple, smog-bound, decadent, culture-threatened with moral collapse, and desperately in need of redemption before the fresh new century can be born. To Stoker, the Britain of his day was undergoing a profound philosophical and moral crisis. Van Helsing acts as Stoker's mouthpiece on this question, yearning for a return to pre-sceptical and pre-rationalist times. The traditional values of faith have been eroded, and the novel unearths no less than 6 alternative ethical frames of reference, each competing for supremacy: skepticism, transcendentalism, empiricism, criminality, the value of superstitions, the scientific rationalism. As Henley says, the small central group of splintered selves is also searching for a new stockpile of communal and personal values. Stoker suggests that Transylvania, the Victorian London are both wastelands, each desperately needing the vitality of the other to heal its own sterility. Irony of ironies. A skeptical community must come to belief in vampires, with their primitive energies and passions, if the tired, decrepit 90s are to be redeemed. To this end, the novel concludes with the postscript, written 7 years after the Count's demise, that is, in the turning year 1900, in which Stoker's heroes and heroine survey the carnage of the past, and look forward with confidence to the hopes of the morrow. These hopes are built around the rediscovery of personal faith, not only in vampires, but in the God who provided the means to destroy them. Evidence that a cursed accompaniment of modern science is of no account. We want no proofs, we ask none to believe us. To assist in the unfolding of this spiritual emancipation, Stoker cultivates an intimate identity between Transylvania and London, between vampirism and Christianity, which cannot be expressed better than in Henley's own words. Dracula's castle is a schizoid dwelling with upper fashionable apartments and even a Victorian library, but also with lower crypts and vaults, while analogously Dr. Seward's Victorian mansion conceals a lunatic asylum, complete with fledgling vampire beneath it. Dracula has 3 lovers. Lucy has 3 suitors. Dracula hypnotizes. Van Helsing hypnotizes. Dracula sucks blood. Van Helsing transfuses blood, and once, in fact, Seward sucked blood from the gangrenous wound of Van Helsing. Dracula wears Harker's British clothes to steal babies, and later in London even wears a hat of straw. Additionally, there is a consistently stressed analogy between vampirism and Christianity, and both, given the insights of Fraser and Freud's totem and taboo, seem related to the Oedipal Fisher King and the wasteland. Thus vampirism deals with zoophagy, Christianity with eating the body and drinking of the blood of Christ, the scriptural phrase, for the blood is the life. Both employ numerous rituals and complicated liturgy, for example, a vampire's baptism of blood. And lastly, both are locked in a theomachy for control of the world, crucifix and host against demiurge. Both this demiurge, Dracula, and his antagonists engage in a climactic quest, journeying to strange lands with strange customs. First to do so is Dracula. In coming to Britain, he is engaged upon a quest of his own for a personal gnosis. The wasteland of Transylvania can offer him no prospects, no battles, no blood. Dracula needs to move with the times. He therefore comes in search of exchanging his child brain for the man brain of modern self-awareness. But his unsavory activities unleash a counter-quest. The Dracula hunters embark upon their own journey into the unknown with almost ritualistic secrecy and discipline. On no fewer than 3 separate occasions do Van Helsing and his disciples solemnly vow their determination to pursue the Count. Their quest formally commences once Lucy has finally been restored to peace. An oath is taken, and with everybody in turn taking hold of the professor's hand, whereupon he pronounces, and then begins our great quest. This is a terrible task before us, and once our feet are on the ploughshare, we must not draw back. On a later occasion, the inquisitors all stand around a table and link hands in a circle. They then individually swear allegiance in a solemn compact, suggestive of initiation ceremony within an occult lodge. By the time of the 3rd oath, Mina has been compromised by the Count. In this instance, they all kneel on the floor, take hands, and swear to be true to one another, all except Mina, then making a supplementary pledge, ultimately to raise her veil of sorrow. The 3 oaths, in other words, are made first to Van Helsing, second to the group as a whole, and third by kneeling to God, at the conclusion of which the Arthurian connections are truly forged. Van Helsing speaks for all. We go out as the old knights of the cross to redeem Mina's soul. We are pledged to set the world free. They are not embarked on a quest for literal Grail, but for a spiritual destiny that will grant them redemptive understanding, we shall go to make our search, if I can call it so. For it is not search, but is knowing,